Hey guys, John V from Phone Winner here. You're watching our video comparison between the HTC One M8 and the HTC One M7. Essentially what we got here is a battle between the old versus the new, the predecessor and the successor. Now last year when the HTC One M7 launched, it really surprised many people just because it was a drastic change from the previous flagship smartphone. With the M8, of course, we see that evolutionary step up just because it's sporting a brand new design that's more premium. You're going to get the latest software interface and, of course, beefier hardware specs. Clearly, these two resemble each other in many ways, which isn't a bad thing, seeing that with the M8, HTC has improved upon pretty much every aspect of the design. First, there's more metal with the design of the HTC One M8. In fact, its body is comprised out of 90% metal, in contrast to the 70% mark of its predecessor. Essentially, they eliminated the plastic separators around the trim of the HTC One M7. So now with the M8, you could tell that the metal extends from edge to edge. We also prefer the brushed aluminum casing of the M8 over the M7 just because it has that more profound metal look. It's just a little bit more subdued with the M7. In fact, we prefer the in-hand feel of the HTC One M8 more just because the sides have a little bit more of a curved edge to them in contrast to the chamfered bevel edge that we see with the original HTC One M7. It just has a little bit of a sharper touch along the sides. So the HTC One M7 features a 4.7-inch 1080p Super LCD 3 display with Gorilla Glass 2. Whereas with the M8, the only thing new about it is the Gorilla Glass 3 that it has and its larger size. So it's 5 inches, but still Super LCD 3 technology and 1080p resolution. Factoring in their screen sizes and their identical resolutions, you technically get a higher pixel density count with the M7's display, but nevertheless, you would hardly notice its superiority just because from a normal distance, it's almost indistinguishable as to which of the two is the superior one, just because they both produce a lot of sharpness and detail. Obviously, their displays employ Super LCD 3 technology, so you're probably thinking nothing really different about the two, right? But in fact, the M8's displays improved in pretty much every aspect. So for starters, it has a stronger brightness output, so for outdoor visibility, it's going to be better for that. You also have more vibrant color tones with it. With the M7's display, you just notice it's a little bit more washed out, and on top of that, its viewing angles isn't quite as good as the M8's display. You see just a little bit more distortion with it. So even though the M8 is not a drastic departure in terms of specs, we do realize that it's improved in pretty much every category. The designs are pretty similar to one another, and we see it right away just because they both feature the signature dual front-firing speakers with HTC boom sound. But with the M7, actually with the M8, they've eliminated using the capacitive Android buttons from before. Taking a look around their trims, they pretty much feature the same set of ports and buttons. So you have micro USB ports on both on the bottom edge for charging, data connectivity, and even video out functionality. The 3.5mm headset jacks are actually positioned in the bottom edge of the M8 versus the top on the M7. The HTC has actually improved the feel and responses of its physical buttons, both the volume control and also the power button, just because before the power button and also volume control were a little bit flush to the surface, so really tough to actually feel them out. On top of that, their responses were lacking, so it's really nice to see that they're springier with the M8. Another nice addition that we appreciate seeing on the M8 is the micro SD card slot. So now we have memory expansion via micro SD card. Interestingly enough, the M8 features the same camera technology from before, so it's the same ultra-pixel camera from the M7. So it measures up at 4 megapixels, but it features a dual LED flash instead of single one. And on top of that, there's a secondary camera too in the M8, which is strictly used for depth information, and we'll talk more about the difference between them a little bit later on. Interestingly enough, both handsets are running Android 4.4.2 KitKat, so pretty new build of the platform. But of course, the M8 is running the latest version of Sense 6.0, dubbed as 6 Sense by HTC, versus the Sense 5.5 user interface of the HTC One M7. It's worth noting though that the M7 is eventually going to get Sense 6.0 as well. Visually, they're pretty much identical with their presentation. You have Sense 6.0, which the only thing different about it are these new color accent themes that we see with some of the core applications, like the phone dialer here. You'll see that it has this blue accent on the top. And for example, too, if we go to the messaging application, we see that blue accent again. But beyond that, it's pretty much identical. The same modern, clean-looking UI, definitely cut above rest over other custom UIs. And you also have HTC Blink feed, which aggregates pretty much all our social networking content, just a nice centralized place for everything. But with Sense 6.0, it gets enhanced just because we have now access to additional services that we didn't get before. For example, not only do we get the usual Facebook, Twitter stuff, but it now includes things like Fitbit, LinkedIn, and even Foursquare. However, HTC has enhanced the software, the experience, just a little bit with its various motion launch gestures. Now, they're basically quick peek functions, so when it's locked or turned off, we could just double tap the screen to view the clock, the time, date, and even the temperature very quickly. If we want to quickly unlock the device, we could just swipe up like that. And heck, if we want to even just jump right into the camera application, we just put it into landscape, press either of the volume controls, and voila, you're gonna jump right into it. Even though the HTC One M8 has the slightly larger display, it doesn't prove to be any more beneficial over the M7 when it comes to typing up messages with their on-screen keyboards. You have the same Sense keyboard from before, so you have quick access to things like numbers and even symbols directly from the main layout. And on top of that, it's very responsive. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that the HTC One M8 is the better performer in general between them, just because it's outfitted with the latest processor from Qualcomm's camp. To be specific, it's a quad-core 2.3 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 processor with 2 GB of RAM and the Adreno 330 GPU versus the now dated quad-core 1.6 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 600 processor with 2 GB of RAM and the Adreno 320 GPU in the old HTC One. Now, for basic things, you're not going to notice a difference between their performance. Very fast, quick, but there's just a generally more snappy feel with the One M8 due to the newer processor. So for intensive operations or even 3D gaming, it really shows its worth. There's not one handset we'd go with more than the other when it comes to surfing the web, just because you have 4G LTE connectivity with both, so you gain fast page loads, and you have very smooth and responsive navigational controls, so everything about it is just top-notch. Looking at two music players, again, we don't see a dramatic change between the Sense 5.5 music player versus the Sense 6.0 one. The only difference here, again, is just that color theme accent on top with the M8, so it's red to indicate that it is a multimedia-centric application, but still they both have that dynamic approach, a lot better than some other handsets, and even gain this cool visualizer option with lyrics loading up as the song's playing, so it has a very dynamic feel. A signature look, no doubt. They both feature the same front-firing dual speakers with HTC Boom sound, though between them we prefer the audio quality of the M8 set just because it has a more commanding, robust, cleaner tone with it. As I've said earlier, the HTC One M8 doesn't really make a dramatic change over the M7 when it comes to its camera. They both utilize the same ultra-pixel technology from before, 4 megapixels in size. The only difference with the M8 is that it features now dual LED flash versus the single one here in the M7. And there's also a secondary camera right on top there, which is used for depth information to provide some pretty cool U-focus effects later on post-shot. And as far as their front-facing camera is concerned, the M8 features a larger wide-angle 5 megapixel front-facing camera versus a 2.1 megapixel one from before. We really got to say that we're happy that HTC decided to update the camera app with the HTC One M8, just because with the M7 before, it was a little bit confusing just because they combined the functions of the camera and video into one, especially when you try and go through the menu and the settings. It was just a little bit confusing just because you have to scroll down through all the menus and you really don't know what pertains to what. Unfortunately, even though HTC had a year to make some sort of improvement to the HTC One M8's camera, we don't see any of it whatsoever. Instead, the quality is unchanged from last year's model, which is unfortunate again. So basically, what you get here are pleasant looking shots that are good enough to share via social networking, but when it comes to details, it's probably the biggest thing that's lacking. In terms of low lighting performance between the two, like we said, they're identical, nothing different whatsoever. The nice thing about it is that the shots tend to come out bright, so it exposes some of the details that would otherwise be lost, and there's very minimal amount of noise in the shots. But again, the biggest drawback here is just the softer looking details. Despite the lack of improvements, what HTC has done to enhance the quality is by providing a variety of different cool effects with the HTC One M8. Now that's partly attributed to the secondary camera in the back of the unit, which is used strictly to measure depth information. So basically we could apply different focus effects after we take the shot. So for example, we have this image here. If we hit edit, we could add some really neat effects. Most of them come from the U-Focus option here. So basically it gives it that really nice soft out of focus look with certain elements, and from here we could actually select what parts of the scenery we want to have in focus, so we have that professional like touch to it. On top of that, there are just a host of other things that really enhance the quality here. For example, you have the other effects modes here, like sketch, you have this motion blur, you have this cartoony looking one, and colorize. So it's really neat in what they presented to us here. It just would have been nice if the overall quality of the image were improved. Considering that the M7 was already a fantastic phone for phone calls, HTC really didn't need to mess around with the M8, just because, like its predecessor, it offers fantastic calling quality. So voices are both loud and clear through the earpiece and through the speakerphone, and on top of that, they're very distinctive and noise-free. Thanks partly to the battery optimization found with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset, the M8 really benefits in the battery life department, especially in conjunction with its larger 2600 milliamp hour battery. It really propels itself way over the HTC One M7's performance from last year, whereas it was average. This year, it's more than above. At the end of the day, we can agree that the HTC One M8 isn't necessarily a huge leap forward compared to the M7, but instead it has all the incremental upgrades that you'd want in a flagship smartphone, especially one that's succeeding a very established handset. Obviously, if you're more of a budget-conscious consumer, you probably want to stick with the HTC One M7. You could pick up this handset for dirt cheap, in some cases even maybe for free with a 2-year contract, and still is a fantastic smartphone. It has a top-notch performance, premium design still. It might not have the latest software experience, but you know it's going to get upgraded as well down the road. As for the M8, there are several things that we love about it, and then again, there are several things that really disappointed us. For the good, of course, there's that premium design that is even better than before, more metal. We have the enhanced software experience with all the various motion launch gestures, and you also have beefier hardware specs. Its performance is greatly superior to the M7, but then again, the areas where we were hoping to see a bigger improvement were related to the camera. The camera is still the same technologies before, the same 4 megapixel ultra pixel camera, but this time around they have that second camera for depth measurement, and of course it delivers some really pleasing visuals to our photos after we take them, but we wouldn't necessarily say that it is rich with the details. So if you guys want to learn more about either handsets, you could check out our website, phonearena.com. John V, thanks for watching.